Hi, I'm Viv. I have no qualifications and a masochistic streak. Today, we're looking at the 9th Circle of Pandemonium and the first fight of Anabasios. Cockytoes?
Cockytoes.
Okay. Cockytoes, also known as the River of Wailing in Greek mythology, is a river in Greek... Who the fuck wrote this? Like its more famous sister, the Styx, it surrounds the realm of Hades. Sometimes depicted as the god of this river, Cockytoes carries murderers on their way to damnation as they plead to their victims for succor, at least according to this guy. In Dante's Divine Comedy, Cockytoes is depicted as a frozen lake in the 9th layer of hell. This icy lake is the jail of traitors and betrayers, and at the very bottom sleeps Satan himself. This icy prison is much more reminiscent of the arena we see in 14, and it being a cage for traitors absolutely tracks, as you will see later. In-game, Cockytoes is a beast that eats souls from the ethereal sea. It has, technically, 3 forms that it will swap between. Many other people have pointed out that each form bears a striking resemblance to a Crystal Tower boss, Scylla, Glazia Labolas, and Behemoth. Scylla and Glazia were both loyal to Emperor Xande during his coup against the Allagan Empire, which might explain why they're being held in Cockytoes, which, once again, has been depicted as the prison of traitors. Behemoth is... Behemoth. He's just hanging out there as well, I suppose. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but depicting 2 traitors as eternal prisoners in an icy jail in the 9th layer of hell. Oh, goodness. That was cool. Thanks for... No, stop! Depicting 2 traitors as eternal prisoners in an icy jail of the 9th layer of hell is a real deep cut, and I love it. Cockytoes shares its theme, One Amongst the Weary, with P10, and while that could be seen as a negative, the track fits it really well. Staccato bells resembling, yes, the Minecraft XP noise, sell the icy aesthetic of Cockytoes' arena. It being a hazy, incomplete version of Athena's theme is a really nice touch as well. P9 doesn't differentiate itself from other Endwalker fights too much. The raid wides and tank busters are nothing new. The first real mechanic we run into is Dual Spell. The movements required are quite simple, and since you repeat this mechanic about 9 times throughout the fight, you get really used to it. It's slow and boring in reclears, but the telegraph overlay is unique at the very least. Once Cockytoes takes its martialist form, things start to speed up a bit. Archaic Rockbreaker is my favorite mechanic in the fight. It's not terribly hard to execute, but getting the wrong pattern can make the movement pretty tricky. Plus, sometimes something about the way the telegraph looks makes it strangely difficult to intuit the safe spot. Another tank buster gives way to 11 strike summoning, followed by scrambled succession. This is the biggest wall of the fight, and the biggest wall in a first turn that I've done, at least in Endwalker. It's fairly simple as far as limit cuts go, with only 4 players really having to worry about their order, but the learning curve is quite high for newer raiders. It does, however, feel really nice to resolve cleanly, as most limit cuts do, and despite my hatred for downtime mechanics, it uses the arena well and looks really neat. The dual spell afterwards serves as a body check, and Cockytoes swaps to beast form. My guy channels like 12 things here, so I'm just gonna call this mechanic Charybdis. Charybdis dick in her mouth.
What?
I love Behemoth a lot, but just like we talked about in the lore section, Behemoth is just kinda here. This section of the fight has nothing to do with any other mechanic, it's incredibly simple to resolve, and it's slow. There is no sense of urgency to any of the movements, which is especially disappointing because Ecliptic fucking Meteor is one of the least dangerous things in this fight. It does look nice, I guess. I'm sure this is a mechanic that feels a lot better in Blind Prog, and I'm not that kind of girl. Rockbreaker 2 starts out the same as the first, but instead of having to deal with front or rear combination, you get a dual spell to resolve at the end. While I do find this to be a lot less interesting than the first Rockbreaker, I like them combining the earlier forms. I really wish more of the fight was like this, even if I'm not the biggest fan of this specific execution. P9S's final major mechanic, Chimeric Succession, suffers a similar fate to Rockbreaker 2. It attempts to use parts of Rockbreaker and Limit Cut together, and the solution is interesting in its design, but sort of messy when you're actually resolving it. The numbers always go to the 4 farthest players away from Cockytoes, and as long as those players aren't running around like chickens with their heads cut off, it resolves quite cleanly. It just doesn't feel particularly dynamic, and it's a weird note to end the fight on. P9S operates as a very vanilla first floor boss with one major exception. Scrambled Succession, the halfway point limit cut, is the centralizing wall. It tests the individual in a way that no other first tier fight in Endwalker does, and while that complexity is appreciated, it does mean the fight peaks pretty early. Charybdis is a free mechanic. Rockbreaker 2 is simpler to execute than the first, and Chimeric Succession doesn't hold a candle to Scrambled in terms of challenge, style, or fun. The worst part about this fight for me is the pacing. So much of this fight is spent doing dual spell, which doesn't provide anywhere near enough engagement or variety to make up for how much of the fight it takes up. Charybdis taking 2 million years to resolve certainly doesn't help. It isn't the worst pacing Anabasios has to offer, but it definitely isn't great. Kakitos' biggest flaw is dual spell not being particularly fun to execute. Some of its marquee mechanics are uninteresting or slow, and it doesn't offer much challenge outside of Scrambled Succession. P9S is saved from utter mediocrity by some very fun lore, a smooth progression experience, and Rockbreaker being a circus long after the first clear. It gets a C from me. Once again, if you disagree, come at me. I want to see gunfire in the comments section. Discussion is cool, and so is 14. Thanks for watching.